The slap echoed through the wedding hall like thunder. 200 guests gasped in collective shock as my hand instinctively touched my burning cheek. My daughter-in-law Jennifer stood there in her pristine white dress, her face twisted with a smirk of triumph, her manicured hand still raised. The champagne glass in her other hand caught the chandelier light as she announced to everyone, "That's what you get for trying to control our lives, you pathetic old woman." The room spun around me, faces blurred between strangers and family, all witnessing my humiliation. I stood there for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, then turned and walked steadily toward the restroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind the locked door, I pulled out my phone, dialed the number I'd been holding onto for weeks, and spoke just 3 words into the receiver. 7 minutes later, the ballroom doors burst open, and what happened next changed everything. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Pearl Margaret Thompson, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I'd become the woman in this story. For most of my life, I was the one everyone came to when they needed comfort, a warm meal, or someone to believe in them when the world felt cold. Born and raised in Indianapolis, I married my high school sweetheart Harold when I was 22. And together we built a life centered on one fundamental belief: family comes first, always. When Harold passed away 10 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I thought my world had ended. We'd been married for 45 years, raised our son Marcus with every ounce of love we possessed, and saved every penny to leave him something meaningful. Harold's final words to me were, "Take care of our boy, Pearl. You're the strongest woman I know." I promised him I would, even though I felt anything but strong watching them lower his casket into the ground on that rainy October morning. Marcus was my entire world after Harold left. As an only child, he'd always been sensitive, perhaps too trusting, definitely too easily influenced by others. But he was brilliant, graduating from Purdue with honors, landing a job at a tech startup that showed real promise. When he brought Jennifer home 3 years ago, I saw the way his eyes lit up around her. She was everything I wasn't. Sophisticated, educated at Northwestern, from a wealthy Chicago family who owned a chain of high-end restaurants. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes impeccable, her laugh like carefully rehearsed music. I welcomed Jennifer with open arms, the way Harold would have wanted. When they struggled financially after Marcus's startup folded, I didn't hesitate to give them the entire second floor of our family home, the house Harold and I had built with our own hands in 1979. When Jennifer mentioned wanting to start her own marketing firm, I liquidated Harold's retirement account, handing them $60,000 without asking for a receipt or a repayment plan. Trust was what family did. The neighborhood knew me as Grandma Pearl, though most weren't related to me by blood. I taught piano lessons in my living room every Tuesday and Thursday, never charging the single mothers who couldn't afford it. My garden produced enough vegetables to supply half the church's food pantry. Every Sunday, without fail, I cooked Harold's famous pot roast recipe, and my dining room became a gathering place for anyone who needed a family dinner. Jennifer would sit at Harold's place at the head of the table, complimenting my cooking while secretly checking her phone under the table. Looking back now, the signs were there. But love has a way of making you blind to what you don't want to see. My days had a rhythm that brought me peace, a carefully crafted routine that filled the hollow spaces Harold had left behind. Every morning at exactly 5:30 a.m., my eyes would open without an alarm clock, a habit formed over decades of making Harold's breakfast before his shift at the Ford plant. I'd slip on my worn terry cloth robe, the purple one Marcus bought me for Mother's Day 15 years ago, and pad quietly downstairs to avoid waking Marcus and Jennifer above me. The kitchen was my sanctuary. Harold had installed custom cabinets the year before he died, oak wood that gleamed honey gold in the morning light. I'd start the coffee maker, the same Mr. Coffee we'd received as a wedding gift, though I'd replaced the carafe twice. While it brewed, I'd step onto the back porch with my first cup of chamomile tea, watching Indianapolis wake up around me. The cardinals would already be at the feeder Harold had mounted on the elm tree, their red feathers brilliant against the green leaves. Mrs. Henderson next door would wave from her window, and I'd wave back, both of us widows finding comfort in these small acknowledgments of existence. By 6:30, I'd have breakfast started. Marcus loved his eggs over easy with wheat toast, just like his father. Jennifer preferred egg whites with avocado toast, something I'd learned to make from watching YouTube videos on the tablet Marcus had given me last Christmas. The smell of bacon would drift upstairs, and soon I'd hear their footsteps, the shower running, the muffled voices discussing their day ahead. They'd come down dressed for success. Marcus in his navy suits, Jennifer in her designer dresses and heels that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Morning, Mom," Marcus would say, kissing my cheek while reaching for his coffee. Jennifer would smile, that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, complimenting something each morning as if checking off a daily obligation. "Pearl, you're too good to us," she'd say, or "I don't know how you have the energy." I'd beam at these crumbs of appreciation, telling myself this was what family looked like now. After they left for work, the house became mine again. I'd tend my garden, talking to my tomato plants the way Harold used to, convinced it made them grow better. The lettuce, cucumbers, and bell peppers would go to neighbors or the church. Pastor Williams often joked that my vegetables were famous at the Wednesday night dinners. My arthritis would flare up sometimes, making me grip the trowel harder. But the earth between my fingers felt like connection, like purpose. Afternoons brought my piano students. Little Sarah from 2 streets over was learning Für Elise, her small fingers stretching to reach the keys. Tommy, whose father had left last year, found solace in the blues scales I taught him between classical pieces. Their mothers would try to pay me, pulling crumpled 20s from worn wallets, but I'd wave them away. "Music is meant to be shared," I'd say, hearing Harold's voice in my own. He'd always said my kindness would change the world, one small act at a time. Dinner preparation began at 4 p.m. sharp. I'd cook enough for 6, even though it was just the 3 of us, packing the extras into containers for Mr. Garcia, whose wife was undergoing chemotherapy, or for the teenage Morrison boys whose mother worked double shifts. The dining room table would be set with the good china, the pattern Harold's mother had given us, tiny blue roses along the edges. Jennifer would arrive home around 6:30, always on her phone, always with something urgent. Marcus would follow by 7 hours, looking increasingly tired, dark circles under his eyes that reminded me of Harold during his hardest years at the plant. This was my life, peaceful, purposeful, and built on the belief that service to others, especially family, was the highest calling. I thought this routine would carry me gently into my final years, surrounded by love I'd earned through devotion. I was wrong. The first crack in my peaceful world appeared on a Thursday afternoon in early March, 3 months before the wedding. I was arranging fresh roses from my garden in the living room when I heard Jennifer's voice drift down from upstairs, sharp and secretive in a way I'd never heard before. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones that made me pause with a stem half trimmed in my hand. "No, she doesn't suspect anything," Jennifer said, her voice carrying through the old heating vents. "The old woman is completely clueless. Just keep the paperwork ready and we'll move forward after the ceremony." Then I heard footsteps approaching the stairs, and her tone changed completely, becoming louder, cheerful. "Yes, Mom, I'll definitely try that recipe. Sounds delicious." She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, phone pressed to her ear, giving me a bright smile that seemed suddenly theatrical. "Oh, hi, Pearl. Just talking to my mother about the wedding menu." Something about that moment felt wrong, like a piano key slightly out of tune. The way she'd said "old woman" echoed in my mind, but I pushed it away. Surely she was talking about someone else, maybe a difficult client at her marketing firm. I smiled back and complimented her blouse, a silk creation that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. She breezed past me into the kitchen, ending her call abruptly, and I noticed she immediately deleted her call history. Strange, but young people were always so private with their phones. The following week brought more peculiar moments. Marcus started having breakfast at the office, claiming early meetings that hadn't existed in his 3 years at the company. When I offered to pack him something to take, he'd mumble excuses and practically run out the door. The boy who used to linger over coffee, sharing his dreams and fears with me, now couldn't make eye contact for more than a second. His hugs, once warm and genuine, became quick, obligatory gestures, like checking off a box on a to-do list. Then came the incident with the wedding planning. I'd been so excited to help, had even bought a thick notebook specifically for organizing the details. My own wedding had been simple, just family and close friends in Harold's parents' backyard. But I dreamed of giving Marcus something grander. When I approached Jennifer with fabric samples for table runners I'd found at a discount, she barely glanced at them. "We've got it covered, Pearl," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "The wedding planner is handling everything. Just show up and smile, that's all you need to do." The dismissal stung more than I expected. When I mentioned maybe helping with the flower arrangements, drawing on my decades of gardening experience, she actually laughed. Not a kind laugh, but something closer to a scoff. "Pearl, we're using professional florists from Chicago. This isn't some backyard barbecue." The laptop incident happened 2 days later. I was dusting the living room when I noticed Jennifer's computer open on the coffee table, unusual since she typically guarded it like a treasure. The screen showed a real estate website, specifically luxury condominiums in downtown Indianapolis, the kind with doormen and marble lobbies. The search filters were set for 3 bedrooms, immediate availability, and the price range made my stomach turn. Those places cost more than Harold and I had earned in 5 years combined. Jennifer appeared suddenly, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move, practically diving for the laptop. "Just browsing," she said, her voice pitched too high. "You know me, always dreaming about the future. Marcus and I are thinking about investment properties." But her fingers shook as she closed the browser, and she clutched the laptop to her chest, like I might try to steal it. "Sometimes I look at places for inspiration for my clients," she added, though her marketing firm dealt with restaurants, not real estate. That night, I lay in bed staring at Harold's photograph on the nightstand, wondering why my stomach felt so unsettled, like the feeling before a thunderstorm when the pressure drops and the birds go silent. I spent the next 2 weeks constructing elaborate explanations for everything I'd witnessed, building a fortress of reasoning against the growing unease in my chest. Lying in bed each night, I'd stare at the ceiling and list perfectly logical reasons for Jennifer's behavior. Wedding planning was stressful for any bride, especially one from such a prominent family. Her parents owned 7 restaurants across Illinois, and this wedding was as much a business networking event as a celebration of love. Of course, she'd want professionals handling everything. My homemade touches, no matter how lovingly crafted, probably seemed quaint compared to her world of perfectionism. Marcus's distance hurt more, but I rationalized that too. He was 35 now, establishing his independence, trying to prove himself as a husband and provider. The new restaurant branch he was managing required 12-hour days, and Jennifer had mentioned they were trying to save for a house of their own. Any son would feel pressure balancing a demanding fiancé and an aging mother. I told myself I was being selfish, expecting him to remain my little boy forever when he needed to become Jennifer's husband. This was natural, even healthy. Harold would have wanted Marcus to prioritize his new family. When Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing Jennifer at Coleman and Associates, the most expensive law firm in Indianapolis, I actually laughed. "Oh, Ellen," I said, patting her hand over the fence we shared. "They're probably just updating their wills before the wedding. Jennifer's very organized about these things." Mrs. Henderson's eyes held concern, but I turned the conversation to her grandchildren, unwilling to explore why a young couple would need estate lawyers when they barely had estates to plan. The phone calls Marcus took in the garage became easier to explain as the wedding approached. Our old house had terrible cell reception in certain spots, and the garage had always been the clearest. Harold used to make his important calls from there, too. When I brought Marcus fresh coffee one evening and heard him say, "No, Mom can't know about this yet," I convinced myself he was planning a surprise for me. Maybe a special mother-son dance at the wedding, or perhaps they were arranging for me to stay at a nice hotel during their honeymoon so I wouldn't be alone in the house. I threw myself into activities that reinforced my denial. I started a new quilt for their wedding gift, each square representing a different memory from Marcus's childhood. The baseball diamond for his Little League years, a tiny piano for the lessons he'd taken, a book for his love of reading. My arthritis screamed as I worked, but the pain felt purposeful, like penance for my suspicious thoughts. How could I doubt a son I'd raised with such devotion? How could I mistrust a daughter-in-law who lived under my roof, ate at my table, smiled at me each morning? The credit card statements that kept arriving with Marcus's name, but unfamiliar charges, got tucked into his desk drawer unopened. It wasn't my business. They were adults managing their own finances. When I found Jennifer crying one afternoon, quickly wiping her eyes when I entered the room, I assumed wedding stress and offered to make her chamomile tea. She accepted with what looked like guilt in her eyes, but I told myself I was projecting emotions that weren't there. Even my body tried to warn me. I developed headaches that started whenever Jennifer entered a room, my stomach churned during our family dinners, and my sleep became restless, filled with dreams where Harold stood at the foot of my bed, shaking his head sadly. But I took aspirin, blamed the rich food, and attributed the dreams to approaching anniversary grief. Harold had passed in October, and October was coming again, bringing its familiar shadows. I was desperate to preserve the fiction of my perfect family, the narrative I'd built to survive widowhood. If I admitted something was wrong with Marcus and Jennifer, what did that say about me as a mother? What did that mean for my future? So I chose blindness, wrapped it around myself like a warm blanket, and waited for the wedding that would surely make everything normal again. The credit card statement that shattered my careful delusions arrived on a humid Tuesday morning in late April, 6 weeks before the wedding. I wasn't supposed to see it. The envelope had fallen behind the weathered wicker chair on the front porch, probably dropped by our mail carrier who'd been rushing lately due to staff shortages. As I bent to retrieve it, my arthritic knee protesting, I noticed it was addressed to Marcus, but from a credit card company I didn't recognize. The envelope was already torn at the corner, likely snagged on the chair, and as I lifted it, the statement partially slid out. I should have tucked it back, walked inside, placed it on Marcus's desk with his other mail. But a number caught my eye through the tear. $8,000. My hand trembled as I pulled the statement free, telling myself I was still his mother, that if something was wrong, I needed to help. The charges read like a foreign language describing a life I didn't recognize. Premier Legal Consultants, $8,000. Sunrise Senior Living Consultation, $500. Document Preparation Services, Scene $200. Cartier Jewelers, $5,000. Lux Home Furnishings, $3,000. Atlantic City Resort and Casino, $2,500. My legs gave out and I sank into the porch chair, the wicker creaking under my sudden weight. These weren't wedding expenses. I'd already written checks for the venue, the catering, the flowers, even Jennifer's dress when her parents claimed temporary cash flow issues with their restaurant renovations. This was something else entirely. Sunrise Senior Living? That was the facility on Meridian Street where they'd place Mrs. Kowalski when her children decided she couldn't live alone. The place that smelled like disinfectant and despair, where residents sat in wheelchairs staring at television screens, forgotten by families who visited once a month, if at all. I stayed on that porch for an hour, the statement burning in my hands, watching neighbors pass by with their normal lives and normal problems. Mr. Garcia walked his terrier. The Morrison boys rode their bikes to school. The world continued spinning while mine tilted off its axis. Finally, I heard Jennifer's car pull into the driveway and panic flooded my chest. I shoved the statement into my gardening apron and grabbed the trowel, pretending to tend the potted geraniums. "Morning, Pearl," Jennifer called out, her voice bright as she climbed the porch steps. She was carrying shopping bags from Nordstrom, humming something cheerful. "Gorgeous day, isn't it?" I managed to nod and smile, the statement feeling like it weighed 50 pounds in my pocket. She paused at the door, and for a moment I thought she knew. But she just said, "Oh, did the mail come? Marcus is expecting something important." That evening, I waited until they were both home to casually bring up finances over dinner. "I was thinking," I said, cutting into the pot roast I'd made, the one Jennifer usually praised. "Maybe I could help more with the wedding expenses. I know things add up quickly." Marcus nearly choked on his water. Jennifer's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. The silence stretched like a taut wire before Marcus stammered, "No, Mom, we're fine. Everything's covered. Just some business investments we're managing. You know, for the future." Jennifer's eyes narrowed at him, a quick look that said he'd said too much. Then she smiled at me, that practiced smile that never wavered. "Marcus is right. We're actually doing very well. You've done enough, Pearl, more than enough." She reached over and patted my hand, her engagement ring catching the light, and I wondered if that ring was part of the $5,000 charge at Cartier, or if there were more secrets buried in other statements. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I searched the trash can in the garage. Under coffee grounds and food scraps, I found it, a crumpled receipt from Premier Legal Consultants. The services line read, "Consultation regarding property transfer, power of attorney documentation, and elderly care facility admissions." My name was listed as the subject of discussion. The consultation had lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of my son and his fiancée planning my disposal, like I was old furniture they needed to clear out before redecorating. The full truth revealed itself on a Thursday evening, May 15th, exactly 2 weeks before the wedding. I'd come home early from grocery shopping because my arthritis was flaring up in the humidity, making it difficult to push the cart. The house seemed empty when I entered. Through the front door, struggling with the bags of groceries I'd bought for the week's meal preparations. I assumed Marcus was still at work and Jennifer at her office, so I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace of the afternoon. As I unpacked the vegetables in the kitchen, I heard Jennifer's voice floating through the open patio door. She must have been working from home, sitting on the back deck where she often took calls. I was about to call out a greeting when her words froze me in place, my hand still gripping a head of lettuce. "Listen, everything is going perfectly," Jennifer said, her tone businesslike and cold. "Once we're married and the papers are signed, she'll have to go. Marcus finally agrees his mother is becoming too difficult to manage." My heart stopped. The lettuce fell from my hand, rolling across the floor. "The Sunrise Senior Center already has a room ready. I toured it myself last week. It's adequate. She'll have 3 meals a day and basic care. That's more than most get at her age." I pressed myself against the wall, my legs trembling so violently I thought they might give out. But I had to keep listening. I had to know everything. "No, she won't fight back," Jennifer continued with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Pearl's too trusting, too weak. The old fool already signed the preliminary papers thinking they were wedding venue contracts. I had my lawyer draw them up to look like catering agreements. She didn't even read them, just signed where I pointed with that stupid smile on her face." There was a pause. Then she responded to something. "By Monday after the wedding, we'll have power of attorney. The house transfers to us immediately. It's worth at least $450,000 in this market. Probably more if we renovate and flip it." The room spun around me. I gripped the counter to stay upright, my wedding ring clicking against the granite Harold had installed just for me. Jennifer's voice continued, each word another dagger. "Marcus was harder to convince than I expected. He actually cried the first time I brought it up. Pathetic, but I reminded him about the business opportunities, about our future children needing proper schools, about how his mother is holding us back. I told him she's showing signs of dementia. He believes it now. I've been documenting things, writing down every time she forgets something minor, every time she repeats a story. It's enough to convince a judge if necessary. My son. My Marcus. The baby I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through fevers, taught to ride a bike, cried with pride at his graduation. He knew about this. He was part of this monstrous plan. The betrayal from Jennifer was horrible, but Marcus, this was a pain I didn't know existed, like my heart was being pulled from my chest while still beating. The wedding gifts are already being deposited into our private account, Jennifer went on. Her family and friends have been very generous. Almost $30,000 so far. She has no idea because I'm managing all the wedding correspondence through my email. Oh, and the best part? I convinced her to sign over Harold's life insurance policy to Marcus last month. Told her it was for tax purposes. Another $200,000 that's already in our investment portfolio. I heard footsteps inside the house. Marcus was home. Jennifer must have heard him too because her tone shifted. I have to go. We'll finalize everything on Monday. Yes, the lawyers are ready. Once Pearl is at Sunrise, we'll sell everything she owns. Those antiques, Harold's tools, even her piano. It's all worth something. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway just as Jennifer walked in from the patio. They both stopped when they saw me standing there, my face undoubtedly showing everything I'd heard. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jennifer smiled, that same practiced smile, and said, "Oh, Pearl, I didn't know you were home. I was just discussing some wedding details with my coordinator." But Marcus's face had gone white. He knew that I knew. My son, my only child, looked at me with eyes full of shame and couldn't say a single word. That night, after the horrible confrontation where Marcus mumbled excuses and Jennifer simply shrugged with cold indifference, I waited until they went to bed before conducting my investigation. Sleep was impossible anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's guilty face morphing into Harold's disappointed one. At 2 a.m., I crept up to Marcus's old room, now converted into their home office, my bare feet silent on the carpet Harold and I had installed together 20 years ago. The desk drawer was locked, but I knew where Marcus hid keys. The same place since he was 16 and thought he was being clever. Behind the framed photo of his father, the key waited, small and damning. Inside the drawer lay a folder labeled Project Liberation in Jennifer's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it under the desk lamp's harsh light. What I found was worse than simple betrayal. It was systematic destruction planned with corporate efficiency. The documents were organized with tabs, color-coded like a business presentation. The first section contained medical forms, applications for conservatorship based on diminished capacity. Jennifer had created an entire fictional medical history for me. According to these papers, I'd been showing signs of severe dementia for 2 years. There were typed incident reports describing episodes that never happened. Me leaving the stove on and nearly burning down the house, wandering the neighborhood at night confused, forgetting to pay bills resulting in shut-off notices. Each report was supposedly witnessed by Marcus, his signature at the bottom. The second section made my blood run cold. They hadn't just targeted my house and savings. Jennifer had researched every single asset down to Harold's watch collection and my mother's china. There was a spreadsheet estimating values. Pearl's engagement ring, 2 carats, vintage setting, $12,000. Harold's 1967 Mustang in garage, $35,000. Antique piano, $8,000. Garden statuary, $3,000. They'd even priced out my wedding dress, noting it was vintage Vera Wang, excellent condition, size 6, approximately $2,000 resale value. But the conspiracy went deeper. The business I'd helped fund wasn't even Marcus's. Every document showed Jennifer as sole proprietor, with Marcus listed as an employee. The $60,000 from Harold's retirement account had gone directly into her business account, not a joint one. She'd been siphoning money from Marcus, too, controlling him completely. There were emails between Jennifer and her parents, discussing how they'd finally have proper capital for the new restaurant chain once they liquidated the old woman's assets. I found communication with 3 different elderly care facilities, each offering kickbacks for placement. Sunrise Senior Center was offering a $5,000 referral bonus for securing me as a long-term resident. The emails discussed sedation protocols for difficult transitions and mentioned that families rarely visited after the first month. One director wrote, "Once they're here for 90 days, family guilt subsides. Most residents accept their situation within 6 months or become too medicated to complain." The financial manipulation was staggering. They'd opened credit cards in my name, maxing them out with cash advances that went straight into accounts I couldn't access. They'd taken out a second mortgage on my house by forging my signature, the proceeds already spent on Jennifer's business expansion and their Atlantic City trips. My excellent credit, built over 50 years of careful management, was destroyed. If I fought them, I'd be fighting bankruptcy too. The final document broke me completely. It was a life insurance policy on me, taken out 6 months ago, with Jennifer as the sole beneficiary. $2 million, with double indemnity for accidental death. The premium payments came from my own savings account, which they'd gained access to when I'd trustingly added Marcus for emergencies. There were highlighted actuarial tables showing life expectancy for women my age in assisted living facilities. The statistics were grim. Average survival rate of 18 months after placement. I wasn't just being discarded. I was being harvested. Every piece of my life, every memory Harold and I had built, every sacrifice we'd made. It was all being converted into cash for Jennifer's empire. And my son, my beloved Marcus, had signed every single document, endorsed every plan, chosen his wife's greed over his mother's love. I barely made it back to my bedroom before collapsing. The documents fell from my hands, scattering across the floor like autumn leaves, each page another piece of my shattered world. I crawled to Harold's side of the bed, still perfectly made with his pillow in place, and buried my face in it. The faint scent of his aftershave that I'd imagined still lingered there was gone. Maybe it had been gone for years, and I'd been fooling myself about that, too. The sobs came in waves, each one pulled from somewhere so deep it felt like my soul was tearing. I pressed Harold's pillow against my mouth to muffle the sounds, terrified Marcus and Jennifer would hear, though part of me wanted to scream until the windows shattered. 45 years of marriage reduced to spreadsheet entries. A lifetime of motherhood betrayed for restaurant investments. Every sacrifice tallied and sold. I remembered the night Marcus was born, 2 weeks early during a snowstorm. Harold had carried me to the car, slipping on ice but never letting me fall. "I've got you, Pearl," he'd said. "I'll always have you." 16 hours of labor, and when they placed Marcus on my chest, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I promised him I'd give him everything. I kept that promise. When money was tight, I skipped meals so he'd never know hunger. When his father worked double shifts, I stayed up teaching Marcus to read, to write, to dream. The memories came faster now, cruel in their clarity. Marcus, at 7, crying because boys at school said he was too poor for the field trip. I'd sold my grandmother's bracelet that afternoon and handed him the money the next morning, telling him Daddy had gotten a bonus. Marcus, at 15, embarrassed by our old car when I picked him up from school. I'd taken extra cleaning jobs, scrubbing office buildings at night, until we could afford something newer. His smile had been worth the exhaustion, worth the damage to my knees that still ached today. I crawled to our wedding photo on the dresser, my body shaking so violently I could barely grasp it. Harold in his borrowed suit, me in a dress my mother had sewn, both of us glowing with a joy that seemed impossible now. "I failed you," I whispered to his frozen smile. "I failed to protect what we built. I failed to raise a son with conscience. I failed to see the serpent at our table." The pain morphed into something physical, a crushing weight on my chest that made breathing feel like drowning. Was this what heartbreak actually meant? The literal breaking of your heart? I thought about Harold's heart attack. Wondered if emotional pain could kill you, almost hoped it would. At least then I'd be with someone who truly loved me, instead of in a house full of strangers wearing familiar faces. I pulled myself to the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked ancient, foolish, used up. Every wrinkle was a year I'd given to others. Every gray hair represented stress I'd carried for my family. My hands, gnarled with arthritis from years of piano teaching, gardening, cooking, these hands had been tools for their comfort, nothing more. Jennifer was right. I was an old fool. The sun began rising, painting the sky pink through the bathroom window, and I realized I'd sobbed for hours. In 12 days, 200 guests would watch my son marry a woman who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. They'd toast to the happy couple while I sat there knowing I was scheduled for disposal 3 days later. The wedding I dreamed of attending, the grandchildren I'd imagined holding, the peaceful final years surrounded by family, all of it was a fantasy I'd created while reality plotted my elimination. I slumped against the bathtub, Harold's razor still in the holder where I couldn't bear to move it, and wondered if this was how death felt while you were still breathing, knowing you were already gone, just waiting for everyone else to notice. At 3:47 a.m., something shifted inside me. I was still crumpled against the cold bathtub, my tear-stained face pressed against the porcelain, when I heard Harold's voice. Not literally. I wasn't losing my mind despite what Jennifer's fabricated documents claimed. But in that way, you hear someone who lived in your heart for 45 years. It was something he'd said during his battle with cancer, before the remission that gave us 10 more precious years. Pearl, you're stronger than you know. You've got steel in your spine and fire in your belly. When the time comes, you'll roar like a lion. I pulled myself up, every joint protesting, and looked at my reflection again. But this time, I didn't see a fool. I saw a survivor. A woman who'd buried her husband and kept living. A woman who'd raised a child alone while working 2 jobs in the early years. A woman who'd built a home with her bare hands, learned to fix plumbing when they couldn't afford a plumber, taught herself tax law to save money, and mastered technology in her 60s to stay connected with the world. Jennifer thought I was weak because I was kind. She was about to learn that kindness without boundaries wasn't kindness at all. It was enabling. And I was done enabling. I stood before Harold's portrait hanging above our dresser, the one from his retirement party where he looked so distinguished with his silver hair and knowing smile. They think I'm just some stupid old woman, I said to his image. They think because I cook their meals and wash their clothes and smile at their lies that I have no fight left. They're wrong, Harold. They're so wrong. My mind, which had felt foggy with grief moments before, suddenly became crystal clear. Jennifer had made one critical mistake in her perfect plan. She'd underestimated me. She saw my gentleness as weakness, my trust as stupidity, my age as infirmity. But I'd survived poverty, raised a child through tough times, nursed Harold through cancer, and rebuilt my life after widowhood. I'd faced down aggressive doctors, fought insurance companies, and stood up to anyone who'd tried to take advantage of my family. The only difference now was that the enemy lived upstairs. I moved to Harold's study, untouched since his death, except for my weekly dusting. His filing cabinets contained our entire life in careful order. I pulled out our attorney's information. Not some shopping mall lawyer, but Robert Kane, Harold's best friend from his Marine Corps days, who'd become one of Indianapolis's most successful attorneys. Harold always said, "Robert's the man you want in your foxhole when bullets start flying." I'd kept his number in my phone, but never imagined I'd need it. Now I gripped the business card like a lifeline. The rage that replaced my tears felt clean, purposeful. They wanted to put me in a facility where I'd be sedated into compliance? They wanted to sell Harold's tools, his father's tools before him, as if they were garage sale trinkets. They wanted to destroy the gardens I'd tended for 40 years, tear down the workshop where Harold had taught Marcus to build his first bookshelf. No, absolutely not. I thought about the wedding, about sitting there while everyone celebrated knowing what was planned for me. The old Pearl would have sat quietly, accepted her fate, probably even apologized for being a burden. But that Pearl had died on the bathroom floor an hour ago. The woman standing here now, holding her dead husband's picture and wearing her torn nightgown like armor, was someone different. Someone who understood that when someone shows you they're your enemy, you believe them. And when they try to destroy you, you don't go quietly. "I'm not going to just survive this, Harold," I said, placing his photo back on the dresser. "I'm going to win. They want to take everything we built. They want to erase our life together. They're going to learn what happens when you corner a woman who's got nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." The sun was fully up now, and I heard movement upstairs. They'd be down soon, expecting breakfast, expecting servitude, expecting the same foolish old woman they'd been manipulating. They'd get their breakfast, but they'd also be serving themselves something they didn't expect, the beginning of their own destruction. The meeting with Robert Kane took place at a small coffee shop on the north side of Indianapolis, far from anywhere Jennifer or Marcus might venture. Robert hadn't changed much in the 3 years since Harold's funeral. Still tall and imposing at 75, with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing and hands steady as iron despite his age. He listened to my story without interrupting, his expression darkening with each detail. When I showed him the documents I'd photographed with my phone, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "Pearl," he said, setting down his coffee with controlled fury, "what they're planning isn't just cruel, it's criminal. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, identity theft. Your daughter-in-law isn't just greedy. She's committed multiple felonies. And Marcus," he paused, choosing words carefully, "Marcus is equally culpable under the law. Being manipulated isn't a defense when you're signing fraudulent documents." We spent 3 hours constructing a plan that would unfold like a military operation. Robert had connections everywhere. Judges who'd served with him, prosecutors who owed him favors, FBI agents who specialized in elder fraud. "We're not just going to stop them, Pearl. We're going to destroy them completely, legally, financially, and publicly." First, Robert filed sealed documents with the court, creating a legal firewall around my assets. Any attempt to transfer property or assume power of attorney would trigger immediate judicial review. He backdated the protections using a clause that allowed prevention of ongoing fraud, making Jennifer's forged documents worthless. The second mortgage they'd taken out? Fraudulent, and the bank would be very interested to learn about it. The credit cards in my name? Identity theft, federal crime, FBI jurisdiction. Next came the surveillance. Indiana was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of. Robert provided me with tiny devices that looked like buttons, practically invisible when sewn onto my clothing. Another recorder went into my purse, activated by a simple squeeze. The house belonged to me, so I could install cameras anywhere except their bedroom and bathroom. Within 2 days, I had complete coverage of the common areas, all feeding to a cloud server Robert's investigator managed. "Play the part," Robert instructed. "Let them think you're getting weaker, more confused. Jennifer expects a victim? Give her one, but document everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every moment of abuse or neglect. We're building a federal case, Pearl. When we move, it has to be perfect." The financial trap was delicious in its simplicity. I visited my bank manager, Thomas Chen, who'd known Harold and me for 30 years. When he learned about the situation, his professional calm cracked. "Mrs. Thompson, this is unconscionable. We're implementing immediate fraud alerts and creating a protected trust. Any large withdrawal or transfer will require video verification from you personally with our security protocols." We also created honeypots, fake documents left where Jennifer would find them, suggesting I had more assets than they knew about. A fabricated statement showing a forgotten investment account worth $300,000. A fake letter from a lawyer about Harold's uncle, leaving me property in Florida. Jennifer took the bait perfectly, her greed making her sloppy. She started making calls about these phantom assets, each conversation recorded by the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit that Robert had quietly involved. The wedding presented our perfect stage. Robert had contacted Adult Protective Services, the state police, and the FBI. They'd all be ready to move on my signal. But the masterpiece was something personal. Robert discovered Jennifer's parents were under federal investigation for tax evasion at their restaurants. They had no idea their daughter's crimes were about to expose their own. The wedding would have 200 of Indianapolis's most influential citizens present, including 3 judges, 2 state senators, and a federal prosecutor who happened to be Robert's golf partner. "When we strike," Robert said, his Marine training evident in his tactical thinking, "it will be total. No escape routes, no negotiations, no mercy. They declared war on you, Pearl. We're going to end it." The wedding day arrived wrapped in perfect June sunshine, as if nature itself was mocking the darkness underneath. I woke at 4 a.m., not from routine, but from adrenaline coursing through my veins like electricity. Today, Jennifer would learn what happened when you mistook kindness for weakness. I dressed carefully in the vintage lavender dress I'd worn to Marcus's christening 35 years ago. The same dress Jennifer had sneered at during a fitting, calling it quaint to her bridesmaids. I pinned Harold's mother's brooch to the collar, the one Jennifer had already estimated at $3,000 in her assets spreadsheet. St. Matthew's Cathedral looked magnificent, with its soaring Gothic arches and stained glass windows that Harold and I had helped fund restoration for in 1995. 200 guests were already gathering, Indianapolis's social elite mixed with Jennifer's Chicago dynasty. Her parents, Richard and Monica Hartwell, stood at the entrance like royalty, greeting guests with the kind of artificial warmth that only money can buy. They had no idea the FBI was already investigating their tax records based on information Robert had strategically leaked. I arrived early as instructed, playing the part of the eager, slightly confused mother-in-law. "Oh, Jennifer, you look absolutely radiant," I gushed when I saw her in the bridal suite, though the $15,000 dress looked like expensive armor on a warrior preparing for battle. She barely acknowledged me, too busy ordering her bridesmaids around like servants. One of them, Ashley, gave me a sympathetic look that suggested she knew exactly what kind of person Jennifer was. Marcus found me in the church vestibule, and for a moment my resolve wavered. He looked so much like Harold in his tuxedo, the same strong jaw, the same nervous habit of adjusting his cufflinks. "Mom," he said quietly, "you look nice." That was all. Not "I love you," not "thank you for everything," just a hollow compliment that meant nothing. The son I'd raised was already gone, replaced by Jennifer's puppet. The ceremony began at precisely 2 p.m. I sat in the front row, my phone in my purse, Robert's number ready to dial. He was positioned outside with his team, waiting for my signal. The cameras I'd hidden in my corsage and brooch were recording everything, streaming directly to the FBI's servers. As Father Martinez began the service, I counted the influential faces in the crowd. Judge Harrison, who had no tolerance for elder abuse. Senator Blake, whose mother had been victimized similarly. Detective Captain Rodriguez, who happened to be married to my former piano student. Jennifer's vows were a performance worthy of an Oscar. She spoke of love, commitment, and family values while looking at Marcus with practiced adoration. When she mentioned caring for those who cared for us, several guests smiled approvingly. I kept my expression neutral, even as my stomach churned with disgust. Marcus's vows were stammered, generic, probably written by Jennifer. He couldn't look at me once during the entire ceremony. The reception moved to the grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel, where Harold and I had celebrated our 40th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Champagne flowed, the band played, and Jennifer held court like a queen, her parents boasting about their daughter's brilliant business acumen and their son-in-law's promising future. Family is everything to the Hartwells. Richard proclaimed during his toast, raising his glass high. We take care of our own. The dinner service began. 7 courses of excess that cost more than Harold's annual salary had been. I sat at the family table, relegated to the end, next to Jennifer's ancient aunt who spent the entire meal complaining about her food. Jennifer had placed me there deliberately, far from the microphone, far from importance. She didn't know that Robert had arranged for something special with the audio-visual team, something that would ensure everyone heard what was coming. As the speeches began, my heart rate accelerated. Jennifer stood up, champagne glass in hand, diamonds glittering at her throat. Diamonds I now knew were purchased with my forged credit cards. She tapped the glass for attention, and 200 faces turned toward her. This was it. The moment everything would change. My hand found my phone in my purse, thumb hovering over Robert's number, ready to unleash justice with just 3 words. Jennifer stood at the microphone, her smile radiant with triumph. I want to thank everyone for being here today, especially my new mother-in-law, Pearl. She gestured toward me with her champagne glass, and 200 faces turned my way. Pearl has given us so much. She's been so generous, so trusting, so... She paused, her smile turning into something cruel, accommodating. Soon she'll be able to rest peacefully without any worries about maintaining that big old house or managing complicated finances. The crowd chuckled politely, not catching the venom. Underneath, Jennifer continued, her voice growing bolder. In fact, we've already made arrangements for Pearl's future care. Sometimes the elderly need help accepting change, don't they? She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown. Sometimes they need a firm hand to guide them into their golden years. She stopped directly in front of me. The room held its breath. Then, swift and shocking, she slapped me across the face. The crack echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from every table. The champagne glass in her hand tilted, spilling onto my dress. That's for trying to control our lives, you pathetic, senile old woman, she announced to the stunned crowd. That's for making everything about you, for your constant interference, for being nothing but a burden we've had to carry. My cheek burned. Tears sprang to my eyes, not from pain, but from the perfect execution of her own destruction. I stood slowly, dignified, touching my face gently. The entire room watched as I walked steadily toward the restroom, my footsteps the only sound in the silent ballroom. Behind the locked door, I pulled out my phone, dialed Robert's number, and said 3 words that would change everything. Execute Plan A. 7 minutes later, the ballroom doors burst open with coordinated precision. FBI agents entered first, their badges visible, followed by state police and officers from Adult Protective Services. But the real shock came when Robert Kane walked to the microphone, accompanied by federal prosecutor James Whitfield and Judge Catherine Harrison. The audio-visual team, pre-briefed by Robert, immediately connected his laptop to the projection system. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert's voice boomed through the speakers, "I apologize for the interruption, but you're about to witness something important. What you just saw, an elderly woman being assaulted, is merely the tip of a criminal conspiracy." The screens around the ballroom lit up. Jennifer's voice filled the room, crystal clear from my recordings. "The old fool already signed the papers thinking they were wedding contracts. By Monday, we'll have power of attorney and she'll be in Sunrise Senior Center, probably dead within 18 months according to statistics." The crowd gasped. Jennifer's face had gone white. She tried to run, but FBI agents blocked every exit. The recordings continued, each one more damning. Marcus confessing to forging my signature. Jennifer discussing the $2 million life insurance policy. Her parents talking about using my assets for their restaurant expansion. "This woman," Robert pointed to Jennifer, "has committed elder abuse, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. These are federal crimes." He turned to the crowd. "How many of you have elderly parents? How many of you trust your children? This is what Pearl Thompson has been living with, a son and daughter-in-law plotting her, disposal like she was trash. Judge Harrison stood up. I've reviewed the evidence. Arrest warrants have been issued. The FBI agents moved toward Jennifer, who screamed, "This is entrapment! That old bitch set me up!" But the best part came when Agent Martinez announced, "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, you're also under arrest for tax evasion and money laundering. Your daughter's financial records led us to very interesting discoveries about your restaurants." Jennifer's parents tried to flee but were stopped at the door. The wedding guests, judges, senators, business leaders, watched in stunned silence as the entire Hartwell family was handcuffed. Marcus fell to his knees sobbing, finally understanding how thoroughly he'd been played by everyone, including his wife. I emerged from the restroom, walking past the chaos to the microphone. The slap mark was still visible on my cheek as I faced the crowd. "That slap woke me up," I said clearly. "It reminded me that kindness without boundaries is just weakness." "Thank you, Jennifer, for teaching me that lesson. Enjoy your honeymoon in federal prison." The aftermath unfolded with swift, merciless precision. Jennifer's arrest at her own wedding reception became Indianapolis's most sensational story of the decade. The local news played the slap video repeatedly, each broadcast adding new details about the conspiracy. The headline, "Bride Arrested at Altar for Elder Abuse," went viral nationally, reaching over 10 million views in 3 days. Jennifer's mugshot, mascara streaming down her face, her wedding dress replaced with orange jail coveralls, became the image that defined her forever. The legal consequences were devastating. Jennifer faced 15 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The federal charges carried mandatory minimums that her expensive lawyers couldn't negotiate away. Her parents, Richard and Monica Hartwell, saw their restaurant empire crumble within weeks. The IRS seized their assets, finding nearly $3 million in unreported income. Their 7 restaurants closed one by one, their reputation so destroyed that even changing the name wouldn't have saved them. Monica Hartwell suffered a nervous breakdown during the trial, while Richard aged 10 years and 6 months. Marcus's situation was more complex. My son, broken and pathetic, became the prosecution's star witness against his wife in exchange for a reduced sentence. Watching him testify, describing how Jennifer had manipulated him, isolated him from me, and convinced him I was developing dementia, I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy. He received 18 months in minimum security and 5 years probation. The judge, noting his cooperation and Jennifer's psychological manipulation, was lenient. But I wasn't. The financial recovery was complete. Every penny stolen was returned with triple damages. The fraudulent second mortgage was voided, with the bank absorbing the loss and firing the loan. Officer who'd processed it without proper verification. The credit cards were cleared from my record. The life insurance policy Jennifer had taken out on me became evidence of premeditation, adding years to her sentence. The fake business in her name was liquidated, its assets returned to my accounts. In total, I recovered $450,000, plus an additional $200,000 in damages from the Hartwell estate. But it was the personal resolution that mattered most. I didn't press charges against Marcus. He was still my son despite everything. But I established ironclad boundaries. He was forbidden from entering my house without written permission. All financial ties were severed permanently. When he was released after serving 8 months, he came to my door, thin and hollow-eyed, begging for forgiveness. "I forgive you, Marcus," I told him through the security door Robert had insisted I install. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean trusting. You chose her over me, chose greed over love. Now you get to live with that choice. He lived in a small apartment on the South Side, working at a warehouse, no longer the promising executive he'd once been. His reputation was destroyed, his marriage annulled, his future dimmed. He sent letters every week for 6 months, each one full of apologies and memories of better times. I read them all but responded to none. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. I transformed my life completely. The house that Jennifer had planned to steal became a fortress of my independence. I converted the upstairs apartment into a rental unit, carefully screening tenants, choosing a young nurse named Maria and her daughter, who reminded me of myself 40 years ago. Hardworking, honest, kind. The rent provided extra income, but more importantly, companionship without vulnerability. I started speaking at senior centers, warning others about family financial abuse. My story became a cautionary tale that saved dozens of elderly people from similar fates. The Pearl Thompson Foundation for Elder Protection, funded with the settlement money, provided free legal services to seniors facing family exploitation. Robert Kane served as the board president, proving that true friendship outlasts even death, when Harold's best friend became my fiercest protector. 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter from federal prison. Jennifer wrote that she was sorry, that she'd been wrong, that she wanted to make amends. I had Robert respond with a cease and desist order. Some people deserve second chances. Others deserve exactly what they created for themselves: nothing. Standing in my garden today, 2 years after that infamous wedding, I often think about the journey from victim to victor. The tomatoes grow taller than ever, the roses bloom brighter, and the vegetables I share with neighbors taste sweeter somehow. Maybe it's because I tend them with hands that learn to fight back, or maybe it's because every seed I plant is a small act of defiance against those who thought they could uproot me. Pearl Thompson isn't the same woman who used to give everything without question. I still cook Sunday dinners, but now I choose who sits at my table. I still teach piano, but I also teach self-protection to elderly folks at the community center. When young women come to me with stories about controlling partners or manipulative family members, I show them the video of Jennifer slapping me, then getting arrested in her wedding dress. This, I tell them, is what happens when you finally say enough. The slap that was meant to humiliate me became my liberation. It's funny how the worst moment of your life can become the catalyst for your best decision. Jennifer thought she was dealing with a weak old woman, someone whose kindness had made her stupid, whose age had made her helpless. She didn't understand that kindness is not weakness, it's a choice. And when someone abuses that choice, when they mistake your open heart for an open wallet, when they see your love as something to exploit, you have not just the right, but the responsibility to protect yourself. I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, genuine care, and reciprocal love. The young nurse, Maria, who rents my upstairs apartment, checks on me daily, not because she wants my house, but because she actually cares. Mrs. Henderson next door has become closer than a sister. Robert Kane, at 77, takes me to dinner once a month, and we toast Harold's memory while planning new strategies to protect other seniors. This chosen family, built on mutual respect rather than obligation, is worth more than any inheritance. Marcus sends a Christmas card every year. This year's included a photo of him volunteering at a homeless shelter, his eyes finally clear of Jennifer's influence. He's in therapy, working through how he allowed himself to betray the mother who gave him everything. Maybe someday we'll have coffee. Maybe someday I'll let him back into my life in some small way. But that day isn't today, and it may never come. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the consequence of their actions. The house Harold and I built with our hands still stands strong, now protected by legal trusts that no one can break. My bank accounts are secure, monitored by people who actually care about my well-being. I sleep peacefully at night, no longer worried about who's plotting my disposal over breakfast. At 70 years old, I've learned to roar like the lion Harold always said I was. I've learned that being nice and being naive are not the same thing. I've learned that the word no is a complete sentence, and that family members who truly love you will never ask you to prove it by destroying yourself. Trust is earned, not inherited through DNA. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Age doesn't equal weakness and kindness should never come at the cost of your dignity, safety, or survival. The people who truly deserve your generosity will never demand it through manipulation or force. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Now I ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back like I did, or would you have quietly accepted being discarded? Have you ever had to stand up against a family member who was taking advantage of you? What gave you the strength to finally say enough? Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a community of survivors who refuse to be victims. Tell me where you're watching from and whether you've ever witnessed elder abuse in your own family or community. What signs should we watch for? How can we protect our parents and grandparents from predators, even when those predators share their last name? And please, if you found strength or recognition in my story, share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, survival, and justice. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video about recognizing the warning signs of family financial abuse before it's too late. Together we can ensure that no elderly person suffers in silence, that no parent is discarded like yesterday's newspaper, and that kindness is never again mistaken for weakness.